Welcome to the Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians. This show is about bringing inspirational, creative, successful, and happy health professionals to you. Get ready to learn how you can be a happy doctor too. Episode number 101 with Dr. Lynn Marie Morski. Let's get it. What's up, guys? So for today's episode, you're going to learn about using the word no. You're going to learn about quitting. You're going to learn about how important it is to not take on every single responsibility. You're going to learn about how important it is to be strategic with how you use your time. We often are told to put on more into our lives, do more research, do more academic projects, take on more responsibilities, work more hours. But we only have a finite amount of time every single day. You have 24 hours a day to act. And in those hours, you kind of want to spend that time doing things that you love to do, that you enjoy, that brings you joy and fulfillment. And so I think this episode is so important because on the topic of fulfillment and happiness, we have to learn to let go of certain things that are dragging us down and being strategic about this. And that's what we're going to learn in this episode, Quitting by Design. That's actually literally the book that Dr. Lynn Marie Morski has released. So we're going to get to the episode, but before we get there, if you guys are enjoying the content, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps so much. And of course, if you do that, we will give you a shout out on the podcast. Thank you so much for listening in and enjoy the episode. P.S. When you get a chance, please check out her Quit Happens podcast. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Taylor Brana, and this is another episode of the Happy Doc. I'm very excited for our next guest, Dr. Lynn Marie. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Nice to meet you. I'm very happy to be on your show, and that nobody knows this out in Podland, but we just had like 50 minutes of hilarious technical difficulties. So I am even more excited than you can imagine that this is up and working.
Yeah, that was it was fun. I had a lot of fun doing that. So first things off, I mean, that's a true tale of persistence right there. So we have a little lesson there for everyone. Dr. Lynn Marie Morski is a quitting evangelist. She helps people to and through their quits through her book, Quitting by Design, and her podcast, Quit Happens, along with speaking and coaching. She's also a board-certified physician in family medicine and sports medicine. She currently works at Veterans Administration. In addition, she's an attorney and former adjunct law professor at Thomas Jefferson School of Law. When not doctoring, lawyering, or preaching the gospel of strategic quitting, Lynn Marie can be found doing yoga, playing multiple musical instruments, and dancing like everyone's watching. I love everything about that. I'm so excited for you to be here. And Lynn, let's start off with something simple here. What do you think makes a happy doctor?
A happy human makes a happy doctor, because you can't go to work and be somebody you are not at your core. And we bring everything from our relationships, from our hobbies, our inner struggles, our outer struggles. We bring everything to work. We bring everything into that exam room. And so a happy doc is one who's a happy person, and then they enjoy their practice. And I think those are one and the same, because if you don't enjoy your practice, then spending 40 plus hours a week at that practice it's going to make it hard for you to be a happy human. So I think it all ties in together.
I love that. It was a beautiful answer. So what do you think? I mean, you have a very interesting career path, by the way, as I was learning about you and everything. Let's go to the start. What was that? What was the start into medicine for you?
Initially, I was a multimedia designer, and I was not great at it, and I didn't love it. And I thought, maybe I'm just not great at it, or maybe I just don't love it because I'm not great at it. So I'm going to take some courses. And I got to the first day of the first course, which was JavaScript or something. And by lunch, I was bored to tears. And I thought, man, if I'm this miserable learning how to do my job well, I'm going to be miserable at the job. And so I had to go back to the drawing board, which for somebody who always had a plan was very difficult. Mm-hmm. And I put this list, like, do I want to be a florist? Do I want to be a chiropractor? I mean, I put anything and everything on the list.
Right.
And at the time, my swing dance partner was a urologist. And so I was kind of surrounded by the medical community.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, look, what do I need in my next career? Because as we'll talk about, I'm sure later, this was my first strategic quit. Looking back on it, at the time, I wasn't, I didn't have vernacular for it, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to take a look at what you're quitting and what's not working about what you're quitting so that you don't recreate that in the next thing you do.
Right.
So I thought, okay, this job I currently have, I don't see any people. I'm sitting in like a dark room all day doing multimedia. It doesn't have a stable future because they just hired somebody above me because I wasn't great. And monetarily, I'm not making much money.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, like, I need to be able to make enough money to support, my parents if I needed to, just to support myself and not be scrambling for the rest of my life. And so I thought, well, like, what combines all of those things? And I get to go to more school because I was like, what am I good at? Well, I'm really good at school. And, I'm good at kind of being a detective and figuring things out. And so I put all these together. And like I said, I was around physicians a lot. And I thought, like, this is the career I should choose. But at this point, I thought, okay, I'm not going to make another, let's say, quote unquote, mistake.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to know what specialty I want to do when I go in. Because if you just go in not knowing what specialty, which I think a lot of people do, they just know they want to be a doctor. I mean, that is to me kind of a crapshoot. Because what if you like none of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, I've already chosen one career I didn't necessarily love. Let's make sure I'm making a good decision. And so I went through all the specialties in medicine. And to be honest, because that's what the Happy Doc is about.
Yeah.
To be honest, I didn't love any of them except for sports medicine. Because I'm a dancer and I thought, oh, that's very much like dance medicine. Essentially, dancers are athletes and,
right.
And, you're not, you've got some kind of emergencies, but mostly you're just keeping healthy people performing optimally. And I thought you've got a patient population you're not fighting against. They want to get back on the field. I thought that would have been my biggest point of frustration in medicine is working with people who didn't want to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, sports medicine is not like that. So I shadowed a sports med doc. It seemed cool. And so then I embarked on like the 10-year path because I had to do all of pre-med. I was a multimedia designer. We had no pre-med, so I did pre-med and med school and residency and fellowship. And that's how I got to that. That's the medical career.
Yeah.
Path.
So like what I think is so interesting about you is, how old were you at this time when you made this decision, by the way?
21.
21. I feel like that's a pretty bold move to say, like, I'm not going to do multimedia. Great. So we've decided this isn't going to work. And then you did a lot of thinking, obviously. You put all these pieces together. You really did think it through. And you thought, sports medicine is going to be what I'm going to go into next. But you made a 10-year decision, which I think is a pretty wild thing. It sounds like you had a lot of certainty about sports medicine and not other fields, which I think is very different than traditional students who are like, well, I know I'm broadly interested in medicine. So I think that's something very interesting about you. Like, is that something that you do all the time? You just have this deep planning and you aggressively attack stuff?
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
And at different points in my life with different results, because as you said, that was a bold 10-year move to make.
Yeah.
And I seem to have made it with so much certainty, except for what, I haven't gotten to in the story yet, is when
Sure.
I got to sports medicine, I was miserable. So I dove into this 10-year thing. And it was one of those, from almost the very first, I was good at the pre-med stuff. That was fine. That was, biology,
Right.
Easy stuff. But by the time I got to med school, I'd gone from being like 3.97 undergrad to like, did I pass this test in medical school? It was so much harder than anything I had done and so much just kind of like rote memorization. And I didn't love any part of it. I kept waiting for some part that I was going to love. Like, when I get to sports medicine, I'll love it. Head down, keep charging forward, light at the end of the tunnel thing. And that is why I'm so passionate about what I talk about today, because that was a 10-year tunnel and the light at the end was very dim.
Yeah.
And I do not have any regrets because of everything I've learned from that path. But there are a lot of people in these tunnels charging ahead, losing chunks of their life. I mean, like I said, it was a decade worth of just like head down, charge forward. That's not the way to be living, at this point, 1/4 of my life.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was really steadfast in decisions. And there's always extenuating factors. Like I really needed to find something that was going to have financial stability. Like I said, because I grew up in not a wealthy family. I didn't think my parents had any retirement saved. And my brother and I had this discussion, like, what are we going to do? And so my brother went to law school and I went to medical school. That was a big part of it.
Right.
And there's a lot of stigma. And since we're all docs here, or future docs, there's a lot of stigma about why you go into medicine. And whenever I tell people like, oh, I don't necessarily enjoy it, they're like, but didn't you go into it to help people? I'm like, well, everybody goes into a little bit to help people. Nobody goes into it because they want to hurt people, but there are a lot of other reasons you go into it. Maybe it's family pressure, maybe it's financial pressure. And you get into the practice, and the practice isn't necessarily all helping people, by the way. It's a ton of paperwork and all these other things that don't directly help people. And then you get disillusioned. Even if you went into it for one reason, that may not be what you're experiencing on a day-to-day. So if you were having difficulties in medicine and that societal pressure comes in, like, you can't leave. Didn't you want to help people? You suddenly don't want to help people anymore. Well, that's a big thing that I try to help people conquer, because we all go in for our own reasons. And those reasons aren't up for anybody else's, judgment. They were ours. We made them because we needed to.
What was the reason for you?
The reason was, like I said, I needed something that had financial stability and mobility, because I was living in St. Louis, Missouri. And at some point in time around that period, I realized, like, I don't necessarily want to live here forever. And it's significantly easier to move around the country when you have like a residency match. They're going to match me somewhere else in the country. Like, this is when I started learning these things, like, oh, that's a surefire way to get somewhere else out of St. Louis, or if I went to med school somewhere out of St. Louis. And like I said, for my parents, my brother and I decided we needed to do something that had like a financial stable future. And I was around a bunch of physicians that were, people respected them. And it was kind of this aura of like authority. And I thought, well, I'm an intelligent person. I make good decisions. I would but I'm in this position in multimedia where I had the complete opposite of that, because I wasn't good at it.
Right.
Somebody in multimedia had referred to me as a trained monkey could do your job. And I was like, oh. So in my head, all these parts of being a doctor had everything I was lacking at the time.
Yeah. So fast forward now, we're now in this moment where you're heading into sports medicine. Was it a rotation, or did you already specialize at this point?
Oh, I'm in fellowship at this point.
Now you're in fellowship. You're in sports medicine, and then you're starting to do the work, and you have this realization. All right, you're like, what is going on here? Tell us about this moment.
It was, as many quits, a series of small realizations that finally built up. I love my hobbies. I love my free time. I do not want to work at night or the weekends. And somehow the fact that most sports happen at night or on the weekends had kind of escaped me until I was in it, because I was at the University of Arizona. I was a fellow there, and a football game at U of A, we would have to get there at like 3 p.m. to see the players before they went on the field. We'd have to stay 2 hours after. Then we had to come in the next morning to see if anybody had any after effects. I mean, that's like 2 days, full days worth of work as your weekend. Like, there was no weekend. And I'm just standing on the sidelines of games like, and it occurred to me, I don't enjoy these sports. Like, I wanted to be a dance medicine doctor. I'm so far from dance medicine. I'm like, I'm on ESPN nearly falling asleep on the sidelines. Like, this is just not what I wanted to do. And then that was combined with the fact that, and I tell this story very often, we also had to do an FP clinic day, family medicine clinic day. And I was seeing a patient every 15 minutes. We had a refugee clinic, so they were all speaking Bantu, and it was taking 20 minutes to get a Bantu interpreter on the phone. So longer than the period of time that we had for the entire patient encounter. And the second I would step my foot into that clinic, my heart rate would go like through the roof. And so I started taking like beta blockers to get my heart to slow down. I was so out of alignment with my intuition and my body and everything that I didn't realize, no. It's not because your heart's out of control. It's because you're super anxious because you don't enjoy any of this. This is totally out of alignment with what you thought you'd be doing. And so all of that just kind of snowballed at the same time. And I told my fellowship director, I was like, I don't want to do this. And he said, well, finish. And I was like, oh, I'm a finisher. Like, I will finish, but please help me find some way that I can mold this a little bit more to my desired style of practice.
And I think there's a really important point you made there, and I want to highlight it. You said your heart's racing, you're feeling extremely anxious, and you had some intuition there that, wait a second, this feeling I'm having isn't right, and I shouldn't be always having this feeling. And I think what happens often, and culturally, I mean, you know this, and this has been happening, is when you have those moments of anxiety, you're not feeling comfortable, there's the finger pointing game happening, and they're saying there's something wrong with you. You need to be taking more meds. You need to figure out what's wrong with you. You're not resilient enough. Like, what's wrong with you? And so I love that you said that, because that moment is so important for everyone, that maybe it's not that you shouldn't be a doctor, maybe it's not that you shouldn't be doing this job, maybe it's not that you're not good enough, but maybe, and we'll get to this, I'm sure, is how do we start to carve out a direction that you actually wake up excited, you go into work with a sense of purpose, and that you're not anxious, but you're actually feeling grateful, and all of those things. So now let's talk about this further. So now you're starting to shift over and carve your life in a different direction. How did this move?
Well, the initial discussion with my fellowship director, he was like, I'm sorry, I know we said we'd get you into the dance program, and we'll try to do that. And I'm sure he tried, but one time in the entire year did I get to go into the dance program. So still, it was just like a slog. And so I started investigating other options, like what can you do with a medical degree? And I went to Peru and did some, social science work. And by the end of the year, I had a very distinct list of what I did not want anymore. I did not want the Arizona Diamondbacks calling me and telling me they had an emergency every 30 seconds, because you do not have an emergency every 30 seconds. Like, your outfielder wanting an allergy shot is not a good reason for me to leave my full clinic of actual paying patients. And so I was like, okay, not going to be at somebody's beck and call. And then I started moonlighting at an urgent care. And I was like, okay, don't want to be anywhere where I have to prescribe opioids, because you know how urgent care is. Somebody will walk in 3 seconds before it closes begging for opioids. They've got tooth pain or chest pain or whatever it is. And I don't want to be on call. I don't want regular call. Like, I had this list, and I thought, if I'm going to make life work for me, I just spent a decade of my life because I wanted to be happier than I was in multimedia, and I'm not. And now I'm $250,000 in debt. I've got to find a way to make this work. And I set those parameters, and I worked at an urgent care until I found a job that fit those. And I found that job on Twitter. I found my VA government job on Twitter. So get creative, folks, if you're looking for somewhere else to go. And it said, like, do exams a few days a week, make your own schedule. And I was like, I'm listening. And so I applied, and that's where I've worked for the past 8 years. And I work 10 hours a week, no call, no pager. I don't write any prescriptions, so definitely no opioids, and there are no emergencies.
Wow.
So and I make my own schedule. So it took knowing what I didn't want so that I could find the job I did, because somewhere in there, I compromised for a second. I did. I said, I'm going to take the sports medicine job half-time. Somebody offered me like a clinic sports medicine job. And by the second day, I was having those same heart racing, that same anxiety. And luckily, on the third day, he's like, we don't actually have enough patient load to keep you here. And I was like, oh, thank God. And I was like, it was like that close call of like, you almost got stuck in this again.
Yeah.
Listen to yourself. Do not make this mistake. And so at that point, I said, I'm just going to urgent care it until I find the right thing.
Yeah. And something you said there that was really powerful was the not to-do list, like the things you're not going to tolerate. That list is very powerful. I'm sure that's something that you probably talk a lot about in terms of quitting. And I'd love to kind of dig into that. Where does your law degree come into this? Like, how did that, like, again, like, your career path is so wild to me, and everyone who's listening to this is like, how does this woman do this? But like, how did law sneak in there? Were you working and also going to law school at the same time?
I was. So this job that I got with the VA had a salary cap, and I started it in Phoenix, and I was able to reapply and got the same job out here in San Diego where I live now. And they had a different fee schedule out here where they said you could only work 2 days a week. And I was like, all right, well, what am I gonna do with the rest of my time? And the place that I moved happened to be directly next door to a law school they were building. And I had loved the LSAT since I was in grade school, because there was like
a very weird thing you just said. Anyways, go on.
Well, I don't know if you remember back. I mean, you're significantly younger than I am, so maybe they stopped doing this. But they have this thing called Book It, this program where like Pizza Hut will give you a personal pan pizza if you read so many books over the summer or so many pages or whatever. Cool. Yeah. And so my dad had all these old books laying around from this book donation that he got. And one of them was how to take the LSAT. And so that's how I got my pizza, was by learning how to take the LSAT in like 7th grade. And so then later Taylor's face is amazing. He's like, that's the strangest thing I've ever heard. So I tutored then later my brother on how to take the LSAT, and he got into law school. And then I tutored my salsa dance partner on how to take the LSAT, and he got into law school. And so when I moved next to this law school, I was like, I want to take the LSAT. I want to get to go to that school. And it was, again, finally, I had learned to tune into my intuition after years of ignoring it. Like, oh, my heart's racing, treat it with a beta blocker. At this point, I felt so much jealousy for the future people that were going to get to go there, so much envy. And I was like, okay, I'm going to tune into this intuition. I should be going there. And so I said, like, look, I'm already $250,000 in debt. If I have to pay for a cent of this, I can't go. So I'm going to take this LSAT. And if I do well and I get a scholarship, I'm going to this school. And I made that decision in August, and I started in January. Like, all the universe and all the stars just aligned. And I took the LSAT that October. I did well. I got in. And that's how I ended up in law school. It's just following what I passion.
I mean, and it's interesting, right? So you mentioned some emotions like envy, jealousy, you mentioned like your heart racing. And for some people, again, they're blaming their emotional states. They're saying, what's wrong with me? But again, you're talking about intuition. Well, maybe I'm envious, or maybe I'm jealous because I really want to be there, right? And so a lot of people, I think, go into this sort of like self-judgment mode, like they're judging their emotions, but maybe it's like, and again, you're nodding, you get it. Like, maybe that's a signal, right? Like, maybe there's something there. I'm feeling this way. It's not because I hate you. It's because I want to be you, because that's where I want to go. And so, like, I just think it's interesting in your story, these signals are telling you something. And now things are moving. So I would love for us to focus now on where does the quitting start to play into this? When did you start to think more so about that?
So towards the end of law school, they deemed me valedictorian, or however the math worked out on that. And so they said, you have to do a speech. And I was like, what can I tell these graduates that's going to be useful? And by the way, there's your difference between med school and law school. Like, I was valedictorian of law school. I was barely passing med school. That's another thing you should pay attention to.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, I'm going to tell these people about the power of quitting, because I had heard an episode of Freakonomics probably years earlier that so resonated with me. It was called The Upside of Quitting. Everything I had ever thought about quitting, like the sunk cost fallacy and opportunity cost, which is a very random, nerdy portion of all psychology, I'm guessing, but like the quitting psychology around those things was so in line with the way I had made decisions this entire time. And like you said, it's a very interesting career path. Here I am, a doctor who gets to work 10 hours a week, going to law school, still enjoying my life. I still had a ton of free time on top of all that, because I did law school part-time. And I thought, I'm going to talk about quitting. And so I did my entire speech at graduation on quitting. And then I posted it on Facebook. Somebody saw it. I ended up doing a podcast for this career podcast called Happen to Your Career. And he called it Success and the Art of Quitting. And that was the first time I realized like the art of quitting was a thing. And so to fast forward, I graduate from law school, after making this speech. And then I end up being co-founder, in-house legal counsel, and chief medical officer for a startup. And I did that for a year. And there was a massive quit at the end of that. And then I was a adjunct professor of health law for a few semesters. And after that, I was like, okay, none of these things are my calling. Like, I can do them. They're fine for a while. Generally, like at the end, there's some kind of quit, but none of this is lighting me up. Like, you hear this story about people who jump out of bed in the morning, all lit up with what they get to do. And I was like, I want to find that. And so a friend met with me, and he's like, yeah, let's talk about it. And so while I'm waiting for him, I'm in the parking lot, and I write on one piece of paper what I'm good at. And on the other piece of paper, I write what I like to do. And under what I like to do is like public speaking and giving advice. And on the piece of paper on what I'm good at, and this is why you should like put an actual pen to paper when you're journaling sometimes, because surprises will come out when you do that. I put a pen to paper, I say, what am I good at? And the first thing I wrote down was quitting. And I thought, okay, I'm going to find a way to make all these work together. And that's what led to me starting it was initially like a web series, and it became the podcast, which is Quit Happens. And then actually reverse order, I wrote the book before the podcast came out. This book took 2 years to publish, but yeah, that's how it started.
That's amazing. And for everyone listening, I love to make things very practical and actionable. And so everyone listening here, I would love to encourage you guys to do this pen to paper exercise and actually sit down and be like, well, what's my not to do list? I feel like we're going to have a lot of lists after this. What's my not to do list? What are the things I'm really good at? What do I actually enjoy doing? Because maybe your path is okay, but let's spruce it up, add some things that are actually going to get you really excited. Now, you talked about your book Quitting by Design, and it was a process to make and all those things. What did you learn through that process? What are some tips you might share? Not too long, of course, because the whole book, but
Oh, you mean tips about quitting or tips about book publishing?
let's not talk about book publishing.
Okay,
But I would love to focus on the quitting process. So what are some things you've discovered through this journey of quitting?
I've discovered that it's essentially the basis to all self-care, because most of the self-care people are doing, and I'm stoked that there's like a big influence on, or a big emphasis on it right now, but a whole lot of self-care is just like me taking those beta blockers. We are trying to massage away a 30-hour shift. We are trying to meditate away a toxic relationship. That's all just symptomatic care. I can speak in doctor terms here, which is what I love. Like, we are just treating the symptoms. The cancer is what we need to treat, and the cancer is what needs to be strategically quit. What is that cancer? Is it your job? Is it your relationship? Because, meditation is supposed to bring you to enlightenment. It's not supposed to just try to like make you able to deal with an attending. Like, if you're in these totally stressful situations like I was, and like I'm sure many of us are, and this is a whole nother discussion, because residency and fellowship, especially residency, are going to be stressful situations. And you have to know whether or not, okay, this is a normal amount of stress, or am I now like anorexic, or I have insomnia, or I have chronic pain, or I have irritable bowel syndrome because the stress has been so severe that it's starting to take my health. Like, as healthcare providers, if our cup isn't full, how in the world are we going to give to somebody else, right? So that's the difference between realizing like, okay, this is slightly difficult, but that's to be expected, and this is soul sucking, and I really shouldn't be doing this. Because if you are dying in your 7-year neurosurgery residency, then look at, why are you dying? Is it because you can't stand the actual operations, or is it you can't stand like one specific attending? If it's one specific attending, keep going. But if you're in a tunnel of a 7-year residency and you don't actually like the work, and you don't like being on call, and you don't like dealing with patients, then getting out and being an attending in that same thing isn't actually going to be any better. Yeah, you're going to make a little more money, and there are fewer people who are going to be pimping you in the halls. But at the end of the day, you're still doing the same thing. And so a lot of that's all kind of mushed together. But the importance to me of digging down with what isn't making you happy, and what's leading you to need to do all this self-care, or what's taking away any equanimity and peace you had in your day. It's so important to like narrow that down and figure and realize, is this like a light at the end of the tunnel situation that's a short tunnel and a bright light, or the reverse, a long dark tunnel and a very dim light where maybe you should turn around and get out?
Something that you mentioned in this, right, is now we're moving towards we might have a realization that there's something in our life that's not working, that there's something we need to quit from, something we need to remove. And yet the next step then is to be courageous enough to move forward through that. So what are some strategies, or what are some ways that we can kind of do this effectively? Because, for example, I think in a naive mind, when you're a teenager, you're like, okay, I can't do this anymore, and you completely stop everything. Well, when you become an adult, you really, it's not really effective. So what are some strategies of, like, you talk about quitting by design? What are some ways we can move forward?
There are two types of fears that you have to overcome to make a strategic quit. And the first are the esoteric fears, the fears that are mostly in your head. And the second are the logistics, like the fear of, okay, will I have enough money? Will my spouse and my family support me? Will my health survive this quit? So those are definitely individualized, like you're talking about. You don't want to up and quit. I've got, extreme medical school loans. Most people will at this point, or many, and you're going to be homeless. Like, you're not trying to get out of medicine to be in a worse position. So definitely personalize those, health, relationship, and financial preparations per person. But the things I can address slightly more globally are the fears, because we might have a fear of losing an identity. A lot of doctors have built an identity around, I am a doctor, I am a healer, I'm a medical provider. And yes, short of, them taking away your board certification and your medical license and everything, yes, you still have the degree. But if somebody says, what do you do? And you're instead now a sculptor, and you're not practicing medicine, that's an entire fear that you may have to deal with. And for that one, I would say diversification of identity. That's a Tim Ferriss concept. I did not come up with that, or maybe he didn't either, but that's where I first heard it. But you're so much more than a doctor. You're probably also a daughter or a mother or a husband or a partner or a sculptor or an artist or a musician. It's not just one thing. Medicine is just what you did. It can also be who you are, but it doesn't have to be.
Right.
And another big one, I think, for doctors, lawyers, professionals is this sunk cost feeling like, oh my gosh, I've already spent 10 years I'll speak for my own, 10 years and $250,000 to get to this place. Why would I quit it? It's because you spent 10 years and $250,000 to be happier, to be more fulfilled. If this isn't it, you owe it to yourself to find what that thing is, because you have dedicated that much time. You're not getting the $250,000 back. You're not getting those 10 years back. So what kind of justification is that for dedicating more time and money to something you don't enjoy? It's absolutely a fallacy. It's called the sunk cost fallacy. And that's why, because it makes no sense. If you're like halfway through a meal and you're like feeling so sick because you're so stuffed with this steak, eating the rest of the steak makes you more sick. It doesn't get you your money back. And that's the same thing with anything else. So I think those are two of the big fears that medical professionals would have in quitting. And something else I would say is, like you alluded to before, you don't have to quit all of medicine, or you don't have to quit your entire medical practice. There are some strategic, smaller quits that may be possible. On my podcast, I had Dr. Amit Patel. He's a facial plastic surgeon, highly trained. And he was at this point where he was either like, I'm going to potentially quit all of everything I'm doing because I don't have any time for my other passions. And he went to his boss and said, I'd like to have this schedule where I have a little more time off, and I would like to just do nose reconstruction. And somehow they worked that out so that he could only do the procedures he really enjoyed and flourished in his zone of genius. And he had more time for his other passions. But it took him having that creativity and the boldness to go ask the question and dive down into, like, what do I really enjoy about my job and what don't I, so that he didn't have to quit everything.
Right. And there's so many good things you said there. My mind was going like a little crazy there. Anyways, so one thing you said was, and I really liked, is you have to ask the question, right? You only get what you ask for. And so sometimes people are so afraid of the ask of, look, I love doing this job. I just can't do it this many hours. Is there any way you can work with me? Or I love some of the job, but there's some of these parts, like, we need to figure out something to do because I can't handle it this way. But I think, especially in the context of this culture where now there's a lot of, it's well known with all these physician suicides, and physicians are actually twice as likely to commit suicide over the general population. Like, we're going from this like all or nothing mentality, right? Like, I can't handle this. What am I going to do? And so, that's one decision. But I think obviously when you're in a negative place, you feel like there's nothing else, right? But there's actually, and this is what I kind of want to highlight, is there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of decisions and possibilities, and we have to have the courage just to ask for our needs. A couple things that came up also was stubbornness and pride, right? So you have this like internal stubbornness, like, I started this, I have to finish it kind of mentality, or the pride of, this is what I'm really good at, like, this is what brings me meaning. Do you have any comments or thoughts about some of that?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. And I completely empathize with anybody who feels that way, because medicine is so tough that I can't even put myself in, say, like a 5th-year neurosurgery residence place. They've got 2 more years. They're miserable. Like, I know I would have a hard time leaving that. Like, the only thing I had to stick through was like 8 more months of sports medicine. That was not that hard. But you've got to realize, like, what are you fighting for? Do you want to be on your deathbed and think, oh, I spent my entire life miserable? Because, like I think we talked about at the beginning, whatever you're doing in your doctor life is going to have an effect on every other area of your life. You're going to bring it home to your partner, your family, and your friends. The stress from that could take years off your life itself, just being in that wrong position. You're a doctor trying to extend everybody else's life, and yet the cortisol explosion in your adrenals every day is slowly killing you, and maybe making you have weight gain and whatever else negative effects it's having. Just think about the stubbornness of put yourself on your deathbed and write your own eulogy and say, like, what did I do over my life? Oh, I was like really crotchety doctor because I forced myself to stay in it. Like, is that a badge of honor? It's just not. Like, go to therapy, get a coach, however you need to work through the stubbornness, because we all have it. We had to get stubborn to get through medicine. Like, it's rough.
Mm-hmm.
But realize that you did get through medicine, or you've gotten through whatever part of it you're going to get through. And that's a badge of honor to you. But it also means that you should honor yourself and not continue to torture yourself. Like, if it's not working, know that you have done enough great things and dedicated enough for yourself that you owe it to yourself to do something that makes you happy.
I love it. Absolutely. And I think what it kind of boils down to for a lot of people is they don't feel like they deserve to be happy. If you don't feel like you deserve to be happy for some reason, you're punishing yourself or whatever, you're not going to create the opportunities to make yourself happy. So I think it's like this, what I'm trying to say. It's okay for you to enjoy life. You know what I mean? And I think there's this weird feeling that, your family struggled or this person struggled and I need to struggle hard for my future family. But can you enjoy that process and also give? Is there that possibility that you can love this process? So I love this conversation. I love it.
Yeah, I'd say somebody brought this up the other day in an interview, and they called my book like a permission slip. The book about quitting. A lot of people need a permission slip. They just need permission to be happy and to do what makes them happy and to say, forget what society says about quitting. Forget how shocked people are going to be if you quit your medical practice. Because first off, they're going to be shocked for like 5 minutes and they're going to go back to their own phone. Like, people do not think about your decisions for that long. So the fact that you spend most of your time thinking about what they think about your decision is just a waste of time.
Yeah.
Move on from there. But you're absolutely right that, like, you can't spend your entire life with this one mindset of, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve to be happy, and then expect to make these decisions. A lot of times the first quit you have to make is that mindset. You got to quit the mindset that you're not worthy. Quit the mindset that everybody is expecting you to do this thing. Any of those limiting beliefs, those have to be quit long before you quit medicine or any part of it.
I love that. And I've had this conversation like a few days now. Like me and my partner in the Happy Dog, Neil, like we always get excited. But one thing we had is like, it's all in the mind. Everything is here. If you can remove that and you can just start living and being yourself, a lot of things change. That's so hard for people. It's a huge challenge. I mean, and it's a constant challenge. But to shift gears in the conversation, what gets you excited to wake up in the morning? What gives you energy? What makes you feel fueled?
There are 3 things in life that are my flow states. And if anybody listening to this has not heard of flow state, because I actually ran into somebody the other day who hadn't, look it up. Flow state is essentially like when you're doing a thing that, time could, like an hour or 40 hours could pass. It would still feel like 3 seconds had. Time kind of stands still. Everything else that could possibly be in your brain, all those stories, they just dissolve away. And so I have 3 flow states. Number 1 is dancing. Number 2 is playing music. I like sing and play the bass. And number 3 is talking about quitting, because I couldn't tell you if we've been on this for like 70 hours or 7 minutes. Like, I could talk about quitting all day long. And that's how I know I finally found my calling after all of those things that weren't exactly it. I'm very grateful that the universe somehow like put me in that car with those lists that one day, because it's a calling to me, because I see so many people stuck. I've seen them in my medical practice. I've seen that, I've seen my own struggles. I see my friends. I see overall society just has this kind of heavy feeling. And so much of it is because people are just in the wrong situations or the wrong mindsets. And so I feel super lucky to be able to wake up and help people get out of that.
Right. And so I think a lot of people, when you look at career paths in a linear way, like if you look at it, A leads to B, B leads to C, C leads to D, whatever, how could you have planned that your career would have been in quitting, right? And I say that out loud because I think a lot of people I've spoken to, there's this mindset like, I need to be, like you said, I need to go into sports medicine. The only reason you said that was because of the spectrum of available things online and what you've read, it said sports medicine. Instead of flipping the model around, and this is why I like the list idea, what do you like to do and what are you good at? What are you interested in? What do you love? What gets you in a flow state? because maybe the career path you need to do isn't on a list of things online or that is available. And like, for example, with the Happy Doc for me, I like realized, well, I'm good at talking to people. I enjoy doing like a Q&A. I love getting to know people. I'm also in the field of medicine. Why can't I combine things I'm good at to create something that's not present yet, right? Physician podcaster as a career, that's not really like too much of a thing. You don't find that on a list of things you can do. And then, this could lead to other stuff. And so I just say this out loud because I think people don't see, again, there's a spectrum of possibilities and you don't have to live in a linear way.
Absolutely. It's so different today from when I did make that list in 1998 or 2000 or whenever it was. But like, if you enjoy making sneakers for hamsters, you could make an entire YouTube channel and have a giant following on your hamster sneaker store. Like these things that you just a little creativity, like you can add, like you said, doctor plus whatever other thing. Do you want to be like the first knitting doctor on the moon? Just combine like 12 things you like to do.
Right.
And that's never been more possible. The barriers to entry, like you said, podcasting is a great example. You don't even have to buy a mic. You just sign up for a service and you were podcasting.
Yeah.
And figure out what you love to do. And don't get it exactly what you said. Don't get stuck in that. I don't see anything on the list that perfectly fits my skills. No, look at all your skills. Don't just say like, oh, I have a medical degree. Yeah, you have a medical degree plus you like talking, plus you're good at conversation. Maybe you're good at listening. Maybe you're great at quilting. And so you can, quilt medical like blankets or something. Like who knows, just combine the things you like to do, but get out of what is making you miserable. Find a way to be more in flow.
Yeah. No, I love that. And here's another thing too, on the topic of like helping others, right? And I know you're gonna say yes, like totally this. When you're in flow and when you're excited about your life, you impact other people in a much more powerful way because you're more energetic, you're living the example, and people are like, what is that person doing, right? Like, why are you so happy when I'm so miserable right now? Like something's not adding up here. And then they go to you for advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And the number one thing I would say to them is like, well, if you're miserable, what do you need to quit? Because so many people think I'm miserable, I need to do something else. No, stop adding. It's probably a subtraction that you need because there's probably something going on in your life. Now, maybe 0.1% of the time, it's because they're totally drifting. Everything's fine. They just have no excitement. Maybe they need to add some more excitement. But I'd say for the vast majority of people, if they're walking around in that state, then yeah, maybe start by subtracting that job or that partner that's stressing you out, or maybe the city. Some people don't love downtown New York and they're stuck in this super metropolitan. Go live somewhere else. Like realize what's causing you to look so much less excited about life than I am. And like, I don't have all the answers. There are plenty of things in my life I would still need to quit. Mindsets, especially, those are the hardest to go. Mm-hmm. But get yourself in a place where you can listen to your intuition enough to know what's making you miserable and then get rid of whatever that is.
Right. If you were 21 right now, what would you tell yourself, or what would you have done differently?
I can't say I would have done anything differently because I feel as though, like you just said, I'm so called to what I do now. There's no way I could be at this point if I had made a bunch of correct decisions, because I made a bunch of questionable decisions. We'll say, they weren't right or wrong,
Right.
But I should have realized, for example, at some point in third or fourth year of medicine, when we would talk about like picking a residency, and I would say, what residency you're going to choose? And they would all say, I don't know. I've liked every rotation. And every single time I thought in my head, I've liked 0 rotations. Like that should have been a clue. And if I had stopped at any point in time, maybe I would have found some other calling, but it might have been maybe more just a personal calling to me. Maybe I went off and became a, choreographer or something like that, something that I love to do. But I feel as though this can help so many more people that, to me, it's worth it to have made all those decisions in the order I made them.
Right. And something else about your story too is like you're calling, technically, like you're not just doing one thing, right? So like for you, your calling's like almost like a mixed thing. Like you like to do lots of stuff at the same time. And I think there's this also a mindset. If I'm not called to do this thing, I suck. But like, you know what I mean? but you're like, for you, like, you like to dabble in multiple fields and bring those things together. So your calling is to almost be like a polymath, and like to enjoy multiple things and bring them together. So I just, again, like, it doesn't have to be one thing. You don't have to find the calling. It could be lots of stuff. And so, I mean, I just really enjoy like speaking to you about this.
Well, I appreciate that very much, because I think a lot of us are, like you said, polymaths underneath it all. Very few people are just like, I am good at medicine. I'm only good at medicine. Look at how many doctors, are also musicians or artists. We like multi-potentialite is another term for polymath. And why ignore all those other areas? But for the fact that many in medicine don't have time to explore them. They're working 60 plus hours a week. And by the time you get home, you're too exhausted to pick up a musical instrument. And that was just something that if that's one of your flow states, you need to prioritize it. Because that's why I said, I'm not going to work a full-time medical job so to where I get home and I'm just too mentally and physically exhausted to do what I love. I'm going to build a life based on what I love. And by the way, I am not rolling in cash. Like, working 10 hours a week at the VA definitely pays the bills, but I see my, colleagues rolling in their sweet Tesla, et cetera. And I just know what's the priority for me. The priority for me is that I get to, play the bass whenever I want to, or I get to, in the middle of the day, go to a yoga class. You make those calls because at the end of your life, like, is it the things that you had? Is it the stubbornness you had? Like, I was a doctor and this pride and all that. Or is it like, how much flow and happiness and life in your years did you have?
That was beautiful. So someone's listening to this conversation. They absolutely loved it. What is their next step in starting to think about quitting?
I'd say, I mean, short of, if you want to make a financial step, pay $8 and get the book. But you can tune into my podcast, which is
Quitting by Design.
The book, yes,
Correct.
the book is Quitting by Design. Thank you. Because it's a step-by-step guide. It starts you on number one, is there something you need to quit? How to realize whether or not there's something you need to quit. It tries to help overcome the stigma of quitting. If that's a sticking point for you, call it pivoting, call it transforming. And there's other ways that it helps you overcome that. And then it takes you through all those fears and more that we talked about, prepares your logistics, and then helps you enact a quit in the best way possible if you are going to make a quit, so that you preserve relationships, etc. So if you are feeling stuck in some area, it's just a really easy, concise, it's like this long. It's like, see, it's very skinny. It's an easy guide to going through that process for yourself. And if you're stuck at any one of those points, go to my podcast called Quit Happens. There's like 43 episodes at this point, and scroll through like, okay, is it financial fears that are holding you back? Okay, there's, I'll try to put it in the title, like facing your financial fears or quitting an identity. Like, there's probably somebody out there who's now doing pretty well for themselves, who's had those exact same concerns you did. Take a listen to their episode. You'll probably feel better. You'll feel like, oh, you're not so alone. And then you may get some additional tips on how they encountered those fears and got through them.
Beautiful. I love it. So there's multiple ways to reach out to you. Do you think the best way to tune into you is through your podcast?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Quitting by Design. You can go to quittingbydesign.com where the podcast is and the book is. But yeah, if you follow me on social media, or you can go to Quitopia. I have a Facebook group, like the Happy Doc has a Facebook group. We do a little extra, quit of the week live. I'm also on
Quitopia. I love the name.
Thank you. And also all the episodes of Quit Happens, and I do a quit of the week on Facebook every week. I put those all on my YouTube channel, Quitting by Design. So essentially you type in Quitting by Design and Google should just like vomit things back at you that you can follow.
Great. And what is one thing you'd like our listeners to leave with today?
I want you to take this podcast, like the whole Happy Doc podcast, to heart, because there's no point in being an unhappy doc. Like, there's no badge of honor in being a doctor if you're not healthy yourself, and what being in the wrong thing can do. You see it in your patients. Why do they have stress? Why do they have high blood pressure, GERD, irritable bowel syndrome? Because they're in toxic relationships, because they're in maybe work situations that don't work, or because they have a mindset that's eating them alive from the inside. You see it in others, but you've got to take care of yourself first. And if it's quitting medicine, it's okay. You'll find some way to deal with the loans. I don't have any magic wand for that, but there are creative ways to make money. And if it's quitting just parts of medicine, then take a look at that, because it may be a much easier quit, but you can, like you said, carve out a practice that works a lot better for you so that you can in turn work a lot better for your patients.
Beautiful. I hope everyone takes that to heart and thinks about it. Also, utilizing some of those lists we talked about before, putting things like pen to paper, and putting in the time to think about this because it's your life, you know? So, Dr. Lynn Marie Morski, you have a very diverse skill set. You're a wonderful speaker. I really enjoyed having you on. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to the Happy Doc podcast, the voice of fulfilled physicians. If you enjoyed the episode, please drop us a like, comment, and share. Share us through the social media channels we have on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The handle is at Happy Doc Podcast. That's at Happy Doc Podcast. You can find our website at www.thehappydoc.com. Again, thank you so much for listening to the Happy Doc, the voice of fulfilled physicians.